You think you've seen bad bosses? Imagine a hotel manager so greedy, so careless. She broke laws, ruined lives, and laughed while doing it. But one brave worker had a plan that would destroy her world. This isn't my story, but it's one I'll never forget. It belongs to my friend, Stephanie. She worked harder than anyone I knew, but one day she decided she was done being pushed around. And what she did after that, it left an entire management company in flames. Let me take you back. Stephanie and I both worked the front desk of a hotel. It wasn't the fanciest place, but it was steady work. The hotel itself was owned by one person, but the daily operations were run by a management company. They were supposed to bring order, keep things smooth, and make sure the staff and guests were happy. But instead, they brought in people who turned everything upside down. First, they placed a general manager who barely lasted. Then came Mary. Now Mary, she was a nightmare. From the first week, you could see it. She had this air of arrogance, like she was above everyone else. She didn't follow the law, didn't care about employees, and only showed kindness to the 2 or 3 people she favored. The rest of us, she treated us like trash. I didn't stick around too long after she came in. Life took me to another state, so I left the job, but Stephanie stayed. And that's when things really started to go downhill. At first, it was small things. Mary started cutting hours, moving people around, and making everyone uncomfortable. But then, she began firing people left and right. Front desk workers, restaurant staff, housekeepers. No one was safe. She didn't do it because they were bad at their jobs. She did it to save money. Fewer employees meant she could pocket bigger bonuses. But the work didn't disappear just because Mary wanted more cash. Stephanie had to pick up the slack. She worked doubles, sometimes from early morning until late at night, all by herself. Guests lined up in long lines at the front desk, frustrated because nothing was ready when they arrived. And every time Stephanie begged for help, Mary just shrugged and walked away. Mary wasn't only heartless, she was reckless. After firing restaurant staff, she started bringing her husband into the hotel kitchen, not as an employee, not with any training or pay, just as her solution. He cooked food for paying guests without going through the required safety checks or even being on the payroll. It was against every rule in the book. If that wasn't bad enough, Mary also began tampering with paychecks. Employees who worked overtime stopped seeing it on their checks. Hours disappeared like magic. People would work until they were exhausted, only to find out that Mary had erased their overtime to save money. And behind the scenes, she wasn't exactly loyal to the owner either. She sent emails calling the owner stupid, mocking her decisions, and acting like she knew better than everyone else. She thought she was untouchable. Then came the night that changed everything. It was one of the busiest check-in days of the season. Guests poured into the lobby, tired from travel, ready to get to their rooms. But the rooms weren't prepared. Nothing had been checked before shift change. Stephanie came into chaos. She had stacks of paperwork, ringing phones, and a lobby full of frustrated guests. And Mary? She clocked out early and left. Stephanie worked as fast as she could. She apologized to guests, promised solutions, and did her best to keep everything under control. But Mary had planned it this way. It was her little game. Leave Stephanie drowning in work and watch her suffer. But that night, Stephanie decided she was done. She knew Mary lived an hour away. So she waited. She smiled, nodded, and got to the first hour of madness. She promised guests that the general manager herself, Mary, would handle their complaints personally. Broken air conditioning, dirty rooms, overcharges. Stephanie told them Mary would take care of it all. Then she quietly sent a message to the only 2 front desk co-workers left on staff. "You might get a call from Mary tonight," she told them. "Don't answer." They agreed. Once that hour passed, and she knew Mary was home, Stephanie took a deep breath. She slipped off her uniform shirt, folded it neatly, and placed it on the counter. And then she walked out. Just like that. The front desk stood empty. Guests started lining up again, voices rising, angry that no one was there to help them. Restaurant workers came over to see what was going on, but they didn't know how to use a computer system. They tried, but the line only grew longer. Finally, someone called Mary. And that's when the real fun began. Mary dialed Stephanie's phone. No answer. She tried the other front desk staff. Silence. Panic set in. She had no choice. She had to drive the full hour back to the hotel. When she arrived, it was a scene straight out of a nightmare. Guests were furious. People demanded refunds, shouted about their rooms, and complained that no one had been around for hours. Mary had to face every single one of them, alone, as her staff refused to pick up her calls. And Stephanie? She was already miles away, calm, knowing she had set the perfect trap. But walking out wasn't the end. Stephanie had been preparing for this moment for weeks. She had saved copies of emails, pay stubs, and even video proof of Mary's husband working illegally in the kitchen. All of it went onto a small thumb drive. That same night, she mailed it straight to the hotel owner. The storm was only beginning. When the owner opened that package and saw the truth, everything Stephanie had planned started to unravel in ways Mary never imagined. The package arrived on the owner's desk 2 days later. She had no idea what was inside, but as soon as she plugged that thumb drive into her computer, her jaw dropped. The first thing she saw was an email chain. It was Mary, bad-mouthing her, calling her clueless and stupid. She mocked her decisions, bragged about how she was cutting corners, and even admitted to shaving off employee overtime to pad her bonus. The words were right there in black and white. Then came the pay stubs. Side by side, Stephanie had lined up copies that didn't match. Hours that were worked, missing, overtime erased. Staff who were promised pay never received what they earned. The evidence was undeniable. But the biggest blow was the video. Grainy footage, recorded from behind the counter, showing Mary's husband in the restaurant kitchen. He wasn't in uniform. He wasn't wearing gloves or following safety rules. He was cooking food for paying guests as if he belonged there. Except he wasn't even on the payroll. The owner sat in silence, staring at the screen. She trusted the management company to send her professionals. She paid them to keep her hotel running smoothly. And here was proof that they had placed someone who was not only incompetent, but breaking the law. She didn't waste any time. Within hours, she forwarded everything to HR. That same week, investigators arrived at the hotel. They came quietly without warning. They asked for time cards, schedules, and pay records. They sat down with employees, one by one, listening to their stories. Every single worker had something to say. Housekeepers talked about being overworked and underpaid. Restaurant staff admitted they were scared to speak up about Mary's husband. Front desk workers revealed how their overtime disappeared. And then came Stephanie's testimony. Calm, steady, and backed by evidence, she laid everything out. How Mary abandoned her on the busiest nights. How she cut staff until the hotel could barely function. How she humiliated people, mocked the owner, and treated guests like they didn't matter. HR didn't just see a problem. They saw a disaster. Mary tried to defend herself, of course. She said Stephanie was lying. She claimed the video was taken out of context. She insisted she was only trying to help the hotel save money. But the evidence crushed her. There was no excuse for missing wages, no way to explain her husband working illegally, no justification for things she had written in those emails. The investigation spread further. HR didn't stop at Mary. They started looking into the management company itself. After all, this wasn't the first general manager they had sent who failed miserably. The owner wanted answers. Why had they kept placing people like this in her hotel? How many other properties were suffering the same way? While the investigation grew, Stephanie quietly kept her head down. She still worked shifts, but everyone knew she was the reason Mary was under fire. Staff whispered about her courage, about how she had finally stood up to the bully who thought she was untouchable. And then came the day everything exploded. Mary was called into a meeting. HR was there. The owner was there. Her bosses from the management company were there. They laid it all out in front of her. The emails, the missing wages, the video, the witness statements. One by one, her excuses fell apart. She realized she wasn't just losing her job. She was being humiliated, fired, disgraced, and exposed in front of everyone she had tried to control. The owner's voice was calm but sharp when she finally said the words. "You're finished here." Mary's face went pale. She tried to argue, but no one listened. Security walked her out. She had to face the very employees she tormented as she left, and none of them looked away. But the fallout didn't stop with Mary. The owner had had enough. She cut ties with the management company completely. "This isn't the first time you failed me," she told them, "and it will be the last." Contracts were terminated. Their reputation took a blow. And Stephanie? The owner called her in privately. She thanked her for her courage, for her loyalty, for gathering the truth when no one else dared. She even offered her to stay on with better pay and more authority. Stephanie smiled politely, but deep down, she knew her time at that hotel was over. She had proven her point. She had taken down a toxic boss and the company that enabled her. Staying there would only remind her of the battle she had just fought. But the staff never forgot. To them, Stephanie wasn't just another front desk worker. She was the one who stood up when everyone else was too afraid. The one who planned her revenge carefully, waited for the right moment, and struck so perfectly that her enemy had no escape. It was more than just quitting a job. It was justice. But what Stephanie didn't realize was that her story wouldn't just end with Mary's firing. Word of what she did spread further than she ever imagined, and soon, unexpected consequences began to ripple out. Word travels fast in the hotel world. Staff talk, guests talk, and when something as dramatic as a general manager being fired on the spot happens, the news spreads like wildfire. Stephanie thought it would end there, with Mary out of the picture and the management company cut loose. But she underestimated how big her actions really were. Within a week, corporate HR reached out again, not to Stephanie this time, but to former employees who had been fired by Mary. They wanted to know if the same payroll issues had happened to them. The calls poured in. Dozens of people confirmed the same pattern. Missing hours, denied overtime, shady terminations. What started as one hotel scandal began to look like a much bigger problem. Meanwhile, guests who had been burned during Mary's reign left reviews online. They wrote about long wait times, dirty rooms, and chaos at the front desk. But some reviews stood out. A few guests mentioned how one young woman, Stephanie, had been the only one keeping the place afloat. How she was polite, calm, and apologetic even when the situation was impossible. Word of her professionalism reached the owner, and even other hotel owners in the area began to take notice. Stephanie, though, wasn't focused on fame. She was still showing up for shifts, quietly doing her work. But the staff treated her differently now. When she walked in, they smiled more. They stood a little taller. She had shown them it was possible to fight back. Mary, on the other hand, was spiraling. After being fired, she tried to land another management job at a different hotel chain. But the industry is small. References were checked. Whispers about the investigation followed her. Every door she knocked on slammed shut. The management company wasn't doing much better. Losing the hotel contract was a financial blow, but worse than that was a reputation hit. Other hotel owners started questioning their decisions. If they sent someone like Mary here, one said, "What kind of managers are they giving us?" One by one, contracts were pulled. The company that once bragged about its growing portfolio was now shrinking fast. And all of it traced back to the quiet front desk worker who decided enough was enough. One evening, a housekeeper pulled Stephanie aside. "You know," she said, "we were all too scared to speak up. You saved us." Stephanie smiled but shrugged it off. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt like someone who had been pushed to her limit and fought back the only way she knew how. Still, the gratitude in her co-workers' eyes told her she had done something bigger than just quit a job. But the ripple effects weren't all positive. A few weeks after Mary's firing, Stephanie got an unexpected call. It was from a lawyer representing one of the guests who had stayed during the chaos. They had filed a lawsuit against the hotel, claiming negligence. Stephanie's name was mentioned in the case documents, not as a defendant, but as a witness. She froze. She hadn't expected this. She had walked out to make a point, to force Mary to face the mess she created. Now lawyers were involved, digging into everything that happened that night. The owner assured her not to worry. "You won't be in trouble," she said gently. "If anything, your testimony will help us. You were the one who told the truth." Still, It was a reminder. Revenge doesn't just stop cleanly. It ripples outward, touching corners you don't expect. And then came the biggest shock. One day, months after Mary was gone, Stephanie got a letter in the mail. It wasn't from the hotel. It wasn't from HR. It was from another hotel chain entirely, one with a solid reputation, known for treating staff well. They had heard about her story. Somehow, word of what she did had reached them. They wanted her to join their management training program. Stephanie laughed when she read it. Me? Management? She said to herself. But the more she thought about it, the more it made sense. She had seen firsthand what a bad manager could do. She knew how it felt to be mistreated, ignored, overworked. Maybe she could do better. Maybe she could be the kind of leader she wished she'd had. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of excitement about the future. But not everyone was happy with Stephanie's rise. Behind the scenes, Mary hadn't let go. Bitter and angry, she blamed Stephanie for everything. Her job loss, her ruined reputation, the collapse of her management company. And she wasn't done trying to fight back. When Mary decided to get revenge of her own, Stephanie discovered that even victories come with shadows. Mary couldn't stand it. The more she thought about her downfall, the more she convinced herself it wasn't her fault. In her mind, she hadn't been greedy or reckless. She had been strategic. She hadn't been cruel. She had been firm. And if she lost everything, it was because one person had stabbed her in the back. Stephanie. Rumors started circulating online. On a local job forum, an anonymous post appeared accusing a certain front desk worker of lying to HR to get her boss fired. The post painted Stephanie as manipulative, lazy, and jealous. Of course, no names were mentioned, but anyone from the hotel could tell who it was about. Stephanie saw it one night when a co-worker sent her the link. Her stomach twisted. She didn't want her name dragged to the mud, especially after everything she had endured. But she also knew who was behind it. Mary was trying to rewrite the story. At first, Stephanie tried to ignore it. She focused on her shifts, on her training applications, on keeping life simple. But then the posts spread. They moved from job forums to social media groups. Even review sites where guests claimed Stephanie had abandoned them. The lies were piling up. One evening, as she sat at her kitchen table, Stephanie felt the old anger rise. Mary hadn't learned a thing. She was still trying to bully her way out of accountability. But this time, Stephanie wasn't going to just walk away. She pulled out the same thumb drive she had mailed to the owner. Copies of emails, pay stubs, videos. She still had them. And now, she had even more. Screenshots of the anonymous posts linked directly back to Mary's accounts. The next morning, she made a call. Not to HR this time. To a lawyer. The lawyer listened carefully as Stephanie laid out everything. The harassment, the false claims, the damage to her reputation. He nodded slowly and said, "This isn't just gossip. This is defamation. And we can fight it." Stephanie felt a mix of fear and excitement. She wasn't the type to drag people into court, but maybe this was the only way to finally end Mary's games. Meanwhile, at the hotel, staff started piecing things together. They saw the posts. They knew who was writing them. And they began speaking up, publicly defending Stephanie online, sharing their own experiences of what Mary had done. What Mary thought would ruin Stephanie's image only made her stronger. People rallied behind her, calling her brave, calling her the reason the hotel had survived as long as it did. Mary didn't expect that. She doubled down, posting more, sending messages from fake accounts, even emailing the hotel owner with claims that Stephanie had set her up. But by then, the owner wasn't fooled. She forwarded every email straight to HR and the legal team. The investigation turned toward Mary again. This time, not for stolen wages or illegal kitchen work, but for harassment. Stephanie's lawyer gathered everything, the screenshots, the emails, the witnesses, and prepared the case. Weeks later, Mary received her own letter, a cease and desist order. If she didn't stop immediately, she would face a lawsuit for defamation. For the first time, Mary went quiet. Stephanie could finally breathe again. She hadn't wanted a war, but she refused to be bullied into silence. And in standing her ground, she proved something powerful. Revenge isn't always about one big explosion. Sometimes it's about patience, about refusing to let someone else write your story. But life wasn't done surprising her. The hotel chain that had reached out earlier followed up with another offer. This time, they wanted her to move to a bigger city, train under senior managers, and start a career path that could lead to her running her own property one day. She sat in her car after the interview, staring at the acceptance letter in her hands. She thought about the long nights, the endless lines of guests, the exhaustion of working doubles, while Mary sat home counting her bonus money. She thought about the night she walked out, leaving her uniform shirt behind. She thought about the thumb drive, and she realized something. All of it had led her here. Still, a part of her wondered if Mary was truly finished. People like her didn't just disappear. They lingered bitter, waiting for chances to strike back. Stephanie couldn't shake the feeling that one day she'd hear that name again. As Stephanie stepped into her new role, confident and determined, she had no idea that Mary's shadow still lurked, ready to make one last desperate move. Stephanie settled into her new role with quiet determination. The new hotel chain treated her differently, like her voice mattered. Her ideas were heard, her hours respected, her paycheck accurate. It felt almost unreal after years of chaos under Mary. But even as she grew more confident, she couldn't shake the feeling that Mary wasn't gone. She had been too bitter, too obsessed, too unwilling to take responsibility for her own downfall. And Stephanie was right. Months passed. Then one evening, Stephanie got a call from a number she didn't recognize. When she answered, a woman's voice said, "Enjoy it while it lasts." The line went dead before she could respond. Her chest tightened. It had been so long since she'd heard from Mary, but she knew immediately it was her. The next week, strange things started happening. An anonymous email landed in her inbox, accusing her of stealing hotel property. Another day, her new boss received a tip claiming Stephanie had falsified her resume. None of it was true, but it was enough to raise eyebrows. Stephanie stayed calm. She walked into her boss's office, laid everything out, and explained who Mary was and what she had already done in the past. She even handed over documents showing the cease and desist order that had silenced Mary before. Her boss leaned back in his chair and said, "Don't worry, we'll handle this." But Mary didn't stop. She contacted guests from Stephanie's old hotel, feeding them lies about how Stephanie was the reason their stays had been ruined. A couple of those guests, already bitter, left reviews dragging Stephanie's name through the mud. It was like Mary was clawing at the edges of Stephanie's new life, desperate to drag her back down. Stephanie had a choice: ignore it again or end it for good. She chose the latter. This time, she didn't just go through HR or a lawyer. She went bigger. She gathered everything: Mary's harassment, the anonymous calls, the fake emails, the online smear campaign. And she contacted the state labor board. Then, with her lawyer's help, she filed a defamation lawsuit. For Mary, it was the beginning of the end. The labor board was already familiar with the old investigation. When they saw the new evidence, they opened a fresh case. And Stephanie's lawsuit forced Mary to appear in court. Sitting across from her, Stephanie felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, relief, but mostly pity. Mary looked smaller now, beaten down by her own arrogance. The judge didn't take long to see the truth. The paper trail was clear. The harassment was obvious. And Mary had no defense. The ruling came swift. Mary was ordered to pay damages for defamation, and a permanent injunction was placed against her. She couldn't contact Stephanie again, not by phone, not by email, not by proxy. Any violation would land her in even deeper legal trouble. When Stephanie walked out of the courthouse that day, the sun felt brighter. She had faced her tormentor twice now, once in the workplace, once in court, and both times she had won. But the twist wasn't just Mary's downfall. The hotel chain where Stephanie now worked had been watching closely. They saw her resilience, her ability to handle pressure, her courage in standing up for herself and others. A month after the court ruling, her regional manager called her into his office. "We want to promote you," he said simply. Stephanie blinked. "Promote me?" He nodded. "You've proven you can handle challenges most people run from. We think you're ready to run your own property. It hit her all at once. The long nights at the front desk, the endless doubles, the thumb drive full of secrets, the battles with Mary. All of it had led her here. She had gone from being the overworked, ignored desk clerk to become the very thing Mary had pretended to be, a real manager. Except Stephanie wasn't cruel. She wasn't careless. She was fair, steady, and determined to never let her staff feel the way she once did. As she stood in the lobby of her new hotel, keys in hand, she thought about the night she walked out and left her uniform shirt on the counter. Back then, it felt like an ending. But now, she realized it had been the beginning. And Mary, her name faded into whispers, a cautionary tale of greed and arrogance. Stephanie never heard from her again. But if she ever did, she knew one thing for certain. She wouldn't be afraid. Because in the end, Stephanie didn't just get revenge. She got justice. She got freedom. And most of all, she got the last laugh. The woman Mary once tried to break had become everything she could never be, a respected leader. And that, more than any lawsuit or firing, was the sweetest revenge of all. And if you enjoyed this story of justice and revenge, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. It helps bring more stories like this to life.